Pleasant day, everyone. Today, I am going to discuss topic 4 of Module 1, which is the continuation of the topic 3, that is global theories. We have already established many definitions and issues of globalization that we can use easily understand its concept. In the previous topics, we have also found out its origin and history. Thus, in this topic particularly, it will give us a lot more knowledge about the theories of globalization. By the way, since this is just a continuation of topic 3, which is discussed the beginning of the main topic, global theories, let me have just a short refreshment about it so we could connect the continuation of the topic that I will be discussing. I've learned that the theories see globalization as a process that increases either homogeneity or heterogeneity. Homogeneity, which refers to increasing sameness in the world as cultural inputs, economic factors, and political and orientations of societies expand to create common practices, some economies, and similar forms of government, while heterogeneity pertains to the creation of various cultural practices, new economies, and political groups because of the interaction of elements from different societies in the world. Also, there we have known about the 6 epochs of globalization, which are called waves and specific events as the fourth view in explaining origin of the globalization. So, topic 4 is a glimpse to the fifth view in explaining of the origin of globalization, which is the recent change. The fifth view focuses on broader but still recent changes. There is a sense in the view that a sea change occurred in the last half of the 20th century. 3 of these momentous changes have been identified by scholars as the point of origin of globalization as it exists today. And these are: first, we have the emergence of the United States as the global power in the years following World War II. The US not only projected its military power throughout the world, Korea in the early 1950s, disastrously in the Vietnam 1960s and early 1970s. It extended its reach in the economic realm as it became the dominant industrial power when World War II decimated most its competitors militarily, Germany, and or economically, the Axis, as well as allies such as France and Great Britain. Many other aspects of America's global reach either accompanied this change or soon followed. Among them were the diplomatic clout of the US government, the reach of the US media, the power of Hollywood, and so on. Such as view closely aligns globalization with the idea of Americanization. The story of globalization, however, was not over. The end of the World War II marked a new beginning for the global economy. Under the leadership of the new hegemon, the United States of America, and aided by technologies of the Second Industrial Revolution. Like the car and the plane, global trade started to rise once again. At first, this has happened in 2 separate tracks, as the Iron Curtain divided the world into 2 spheres of influence. But as of 1989, when the Iron Curtain fell, globalization became a truly global phenomenon. In the early decades after World War II, institutions like the European Union and other free trade vehicles championed by US were responsible for much of the increase in international trade. In the Soviet Union, there was a similar increase in trade, albeit through centralized planning rather than a free market. The effect was profound. Worldwide trade was rose to 1914 levels. In 1989, export once again counted for 14% of global GDP. It was paired with a steep rise in middle class incomes in the West. In this new world, the US set tone and led the way, but many others benefited in their slipstream. Second is the emergence of the multinational corporations. While the world's great corporations can be traced back to the 18th and early 19th centuries for example, Germany, Great Britain, and United States, they were initially largely associated with their nations of origins and did vast majority of their business within those countries. However, over time, those corporations did more and more business internationally. In so doing, they were following Marx and Engel's dictum that because of stagnant or declining profits, capitalism had to expand into international markets or die. For example, the once great American automobile companies, Ford and General Motors, not only originated in the US but focused at least initially on selling into the American market, and most, if not all, of the component parts were produced by them or subcontractors in the US. Of course, they did import raw materials of various kinds, and they did sell their automobiles overseas, especially in Europe. But in the main, the bulk of their business was done in the US. Furthermore, the vast majority of top executives, employees, and investors was American. However, that began to change over the course of the 20th century as these corporations exported more of their automobiles to other parts of the world, opened factories in the other countries to sell cars under their brand names or others, targeted their products to the distinctive needs for smaller, more fuel efficient cars of those countries, and more recently began to move more of their automobile production aimed at the US market to other countries, either in the factories of their own or in the factories of sub-constructors in those countries. In these and other ways, Ford and General Motors have become multinational corporations, and, and MNCs are because of their very nature inherently part globalization. Indeed, MNSCs are not only involved in the globalization, but this process is internalized into the organization as all sorts of global flows occur within a corporation. A powerful influence on patterns of world trade and factors movement is the multinational firm. A multinational corporation is a company with headquarters in one country or but they operate in many countries. Multinational corporations, especially those based in the United States, began to proliferate after World War II, 1939 to 1945. Government leaders in the United States believed that future international stability depended on economic growth worldwide, not only in Europe but also in the unindustrial countries that U.S. President Harry Truman in office 1945 to 1953 and Dwight Eisenhower in the office 1953 to 1961, saw increased business investment abroad as a way of fighting the influence of the Soviet Union, whose socialized goals with odds with American interest at the time in the Soviet Union. Socialism entailed having the government control all economic activity. Additionally, the plans of recovering from the war included creating the international organizations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, which were designed to facilitate international commerce. This helped to increase the amount of foreign investment, first Europe and then the poorer countries. Lastly, the demise of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. It could be argued that globalization is even more recent and did not truly begin until the fall of the Iron Curtain and the Soviet Union in 1991. With those events, the divisions of the world into mainly capitalist and communist spheres rapidly eroded, as did all sorts of barriers that existed between them. Major parts of the world were opened for the first time since the early 20th century to all sorts of global immigration, tourism, media, diplomacy, and especially the capitalistic economic transactions of MNCs and the other businesses. The global processes that had spread throughout most of the free world before 1991 flooded into now independent states of the old Soviet Union, especially Russia and most of its allies. Vestiges of communism exist as of this writing, especially in Cuba, North Korea, and at least nominally in China. Cuba remains in the main outside of global capitalism, largely because of the U.S. embargo against trading with Cuba, in force since 1962 and expanded and codified several times since then. However, the embargo itself is manifestation of globalization, the U.S. setting up barriers in order to limit or halt the flow of trade with Cuba and to inhibit or prevent other nations from around the world from trading with Cuba. China, of course, is becoming if not soon, the major force in the global capitalism, even though the government remains communist, at least in name, Fishman 2006. In any case, China is actively involved in globalization not only economically but in many other realms as well. The perspective adopted in this on the current global age is most in accord with this focus on broader changes that began in the last half of the 20th century. While all of the other perspectives deal with global processes, they were far more limited in geographic scope and far less extensive and intensive than the global process that took off in the late 20th century, thus the perspective adopted. There is that globalization is a relatively recent development, with this major point of origin occurring after the close of World War II. Synthesis. There are 6 epochs of globalization, and these are called waves and has its own origin. These are the following. First, globalization of religion. The 4th to the 7th centuries, which witnessed the globalization of religions. For example, Christianity and Islam. Second, European colonial conquest. The late 15th century highlight by European colonial conquest. Third, Intra-European wars, the late 18th and early 19th century, during which various intra-European wars led to globalization. Fourth, heyday of European imperialism, the mid-19th century to 1918, the heyday of European imperialism. Fifth, post-World War II period. And lastly, Cold War period. Thurbon concludes that globalization is not unique. However, historical or epochal view also rejects the cyclical view of globalization. Past epochs are not returning, at least in their earlier form, at some point in the future. Conclusion: the origin and history of globalization can be analyzed through five perspectives. First, globalization can be seen as being hardwired into humans in the form of the basic urge for a better life. This instinct results in the spread of globalization through commerce, religion, politics, and warfare. Second, globalization may be perceived as long-term cyclical process. In this view, there have been other gold ages prior to the present one, and each age is destined to contract and disappear after attaining a peak. Third, globalization can be viewed as a series of historical epochs or waves, each with its own point of origin. Fourth, perspective argues that the multiple points of the origin of globalization are located in seminal historical events. Lastly, fifth view focuses on broader, more recent changes in the 20th century. It argues that the global processes the motion prior to World War II were more limited in geographic scope and less intensive than the global processes of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Would be all in this topic. This is Joseph M. Muya saying thank you for listening and may the Lord God bless us all.